call to order the regular East Lansing City Council meeting of Tuesday, February 18th, 2025. Could we have the roll call, please?
Councilmember Meadows.
Here.
Councilmember Watson. Mayor Pro Tem Singh. Mayor Brookover.
Here. Could we have a motion to modify or approve the agenda, please?
Yeah, I'll move the approval of the agenda with one addition, which is a 4.1B to add the appointment of John McNamara to the Independent Police Oversight Commission for a partial term ending December 31st, 2027.
Okay, and then you also were going to amend to
I thought we were
delete.
just deferring that when it came up, but I can do that.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do it now. Might as well get it on.
Okay,
To
then
defer to
I'll-
the next regular meeting, I think.
Yeah. Also to defer item 5.1 to our March 4th meeting.
Okay, any discussion? Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, moved by Meadows, seconded by Altman. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, motion passes. I would move to excuse Mayor Pro Tem Singh. She has an unavoidable professional responsibility tonight. I'd move that we excuse her for tonight.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Item 1.3, approval of the minutes of regular council meeting of February 4th, 2025, and the city council discussion only meeting of February 11th, 2025. Can we have a motion?
I'll move approval of both sets of minutes.
Moved by Dr. Altman. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Meadows. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, motion passes unanimously. Communications from the audience. All written communications received by council are posted on the online agenda packet. Item 2.2, communications from the audience. I have no blue slips. I assume that means nobody wants to talk to me tonight. Is there anybody in the queue? Okay, we're moving on then to item 2.3, communications from the mayor and council members. I have nothing to add tonight. Dr. Altman?
I just want to thank the staff of the clerk's office for their job. Nice job on the minutes every week. Some of us go on for a while during our comments, for example, and they are nicely, concisely, and accurately summarized, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Mr. Meadows?
Nothing to the evening, Mr. Mayor.
Ms. Watson?
Hello. On our consent agenda, we have an honoring of Ramadan, which began on Saturday. And I had the pleasure to be invited to the Greater Islamic Center in East Lansing to welcome and introduce a well-known activist and speaker. Her name is Linda Sassauer. And for example, some of her background, she was one of the co-founders of the Women's March, which was our single most attended in U.S. history marches that ever happened. The Great Islamic Center also had a ribbon cutting that I was able to be part of. They have built out the basement downstairs and added a clinic, and so doctors, physicians, nurses that can give their time are they're open to them coming in there to serve clients. And they have a workout center now for the Muslim sisters. And so it was beautiful. And Linda Sassauer mentioned, had anyone ever been to a temple where there was a workout center for the sisters? And so it was a beautiful day. I was honored to be able to welcome her to our community and introduce her to everyone. And happy Ramadan. Thank you.
Thank you. City manager report?
I have one item. I just want to recognize Audrey Kincaid, who has accepted the position of Chief Financial Officer for the City of East Lansing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
We finally convinced you, Audrey.
That's where you are, yeah.
Finally. Thank you for doing that. City Attorney's report. Anything, Mr. Chubb?
My items are on the agenda this evening. Thank you.
Okay. We have a special presentation from Representative Tsernoglou. How are you? Good to see you. A legislative tribute to retiring East Lansing City Clerk Marie Wicks McKenna. Good to see you. I was surprised you weren't like going to do this by Zoom and be in Florida or something, and
We're leaving for Florida on Thursday. And I have to say, getting out of, comfy retiree clothes into this was a bit of a struggle, so. But I had to make it happen.
Well, you look amazing. And thank you, Mayor, for the opportunity. Today, I'm honored to present a legislative tribute to Marie Wicks in honor of her retirement as East Lansing's City Clerk. Marie has been an invaluable asset to our community, constantly going above and beyond in every role. Beginning her career at the City of East Lansing in 2006, Marie served as assistant to the city manager under City Manager Ted Staton. Her exceptional service was appreciated throughout the entire office, and she was promoted 3 times in 5 years, finally being promoted to serve as East Lansing City Clerk in 2011. Marie dedicated 7 years as East Lansing City Clerk, meeting each challenge with enthusiasm and a genuine interest in public service. She retired in 2018, leaving to continue her career with the State Bureau of Elections. In 2023, Marie was once again called to the East Lansing City Clerk's office, having extensive knowledge of elections and our community. While she was only meant to serve as interim clerk for 6 months, Marie chose to continue her work, dedicating her time to making East Lansing elections run as smoothly and efficiently as possible. During my first term as state representative, I served as chair of the Elections Committee, and I had the immense pleasure of working with Marie on legislation that will make Michigan elections more accessible to voters. And I just have to say, Marie was just invaluable to our office and to the state of Michigan whenever we needed a clerk's perspective, and not only a clerk's perspective, but a clerk who really cared about the voters and really wanted to ensure that every vote was counted, and that students, which we have a lot of here in East Lansing, got to vote. Marie, she was a huge part of that, and because of Marie's advocacy and willingness just to support us in our efforts, we removed a lot of barriers for students here in East Lansing and statewide, and just voters in general. Michigan is now number 2 in voter access and democracy, and that's happened over the past couple of years, thanks to Marie and some of our other clerks and voting rights advocates around the state, but she was a big part of that. So thank you for that, Marie. You've truly made a difference, and you've truly, just been there whenever we needed you to support our efforts. So I know that Marie will continue to do amazing work for the people of Michigan, and I look forward to seeing all her achievements in the future. With that being said, I'm proud to present this tribute in honor of Marie's retirement as East Lansing's City Clerk. And
Thank you.
And who knows, maybe she'll be back as city clerk one day. No? Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Representative Tsernoglou. I so appreciate you as well. No, my husband begs to differ. There's no returning. This chapter is closed. But I was thinking about this today. I have not missed working in election in 15 years, whether in the city manager's office helping out, clerk, precinct chair, Bureau of Elections specialist. And I do not intend to miss working any elections. So I'm not stepping to the sidelines with everything going on right now with elections in our country. I think that election administrators have to stand tall and stand in the breach to protect our democracy. So I'm not going anywhere, but I am, but except for Florida on Thursday. So I'm also doing some consulting in the election space. So I'm really happy to do that. I look forward to continuing to help the city clerk's office as needed. And I just want to say also how proud I am of the city clerk team and Amy. I'm so happy to mentor her, and I learned from her as well, and all the people in this room that help out with elections and will continue to do that. Lastly, I also wanted to return the thanks to Representative Tsernoglou, who masterfully chaired the elections committee, and I had the House Elections Committee, and I had the honor and the privilege of testifying several times in front of that committee. So your work as well is invaluable, and thanks as well to Representative Brixey and Senator Singh for assisting us financially. So with that, thank you very much. Thank you all, and I'm going to Florida, but I'm not going very far after that.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Okay, item 3.2, presentation of the general fund 5-year financial forecast. Ms. Kincaid.
All right. Good evening, Audrey Kincaid, CFO.
Kind of liking that, kind of digging that, are you?
It's been hour 10, right? All right, so tonight we have our general fund financial 5-year financial forecast, which is our kickoff to our budget season. So the document that you have, we've gone over quite a few times, so I'm not going to spend too much time on what's included in it, other than to say, there's a lot of information in the document about uncertainties, about risks, some of our assumptions that we've used. So I'm going to touch on some high points tonight, but this has a lot of meat in it that I'm not going to read at you. The forecast itself, we put together using pre-populated, have started to put together for the budget process. And then, of course, I want to thank the finance team that helped put the document together, Andrea, Justin, and Dave. If you want to go to the 5-year forecast slide, this is just kind of a high-level look at the layout of the document. No major changes this year. We kind of condensed revenue a little bit, but all the detail is still in the back of the document that breaks out all of those categories in much more detail. So we have 24 actual, 25 budget and expectations for the year, and then our 26 through fiscal year 30 forecast. And then we'll go through some of the detailed assumptions and some of the high points that I think you might have questions on or that might jump out to you. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is property taxes, which starts with Dave. So I will call our assessor up to start talking about his assumptions to get us started.
So my part of the financial forecast is found on pages 15 through 18, and I'll briefly walk you through those pages. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to address them. So on page 15, we've got a list of assessed or SEV and taxable values for the years 2012 through 2024. And what I want to point out from this page is that the city has basically 2 property classes for real property, commercial and residential. We have a very small industrial base, so that's not included here. It just isn't really significant to trying to forecast. The other thing I want to make note of is that we do not, in this forecast, there's no mention of personal property. We don't know what that figure is for 2025 yet. We won't know for another couple of weeks. And it's not really predictable, unfortunately. It can vary from year to year without really any basis that we're aware of, any rationale that we can predict. The other thing I want to note is that in the numbers that I provided here in the forecast. We try to be as conservative as possible. We don't want to overstate revenue in any significant way and then not have that revenue be there. So we try to be conservative. So moving on to page 16, what this is a series of calculations where we take the existing tax base for the city, commercial and residential, and then we project what, I guess, the market move for those two classes of property will be for the next 5 years. So any appreciation or depreciation in property value for those two classes is projected here. For the 2025 year, we've projected 4.5% increase for residential property and just 0.3% increase for commercial property. And those figures, we do have a pretty good feel for what the 2025 assessed and taxable values for the city will be. It's still subject to appeals through the Board of Review and so forth, but those numbers are pretty accurate at this point. And then for future years, for next year, 2026, we projected 3% for residential and 1.5% back to a kind of a more normal year for commercial, 1.5%, and then 1.5% for both classes of property for future years. Again, trying to be conservative.
It says residential for 2026 is 1.5%. Is that, should that be 3?
The page that I have is,
Oh, okay. I'm looking at the wrong.
different year?
No, you have a, never mind, my bad.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. So then moving on to page 17, the prior page, as I said, was a reflection of what we anticipate the existing property values are going to change over the next 5 years. This page 17 is a look of what is in the new construction pipeline, if you will. So property that does not currently exist, but will be coming online with reasonable expectations over the next 5 fiscal years. And then page 18 sums all that up. The chart there takes the appreciation, depreciation of existing property and adds to that projections of what's in the pipeline for new construction. Okay.
Yes, sir.
1.5% number, is that a historical norm? And we're just going back to that?
For 2020, so the 0.3% for 2025 for commercial, that's not normal. We do
Right.
normally see more than that.
Right.
The commercial sector has been down, well, not down, but just not increasing in value as much as it normally would. And yes, 1.5% is a more normal expectation, maybe even a touch more than that on average. So it's next year, then we're projecting it should hopefully move back to that. No crystal ball, but that's our best guess.
Yep. Assuming no more pandemics.
Lots of assumptions,
Right.
sure.
Or floods. Any other questions for Mr. Lee? Thank you, sir.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for coming tonight. Audrey, we're back to you. And you're still
Still the
CFO.
CFO. I made
Yeah,
it. 6 full minutes. Okay. So then next onto the revenue discussion. So that top section is kind of the condensed version of revenue. And if you want more detail, there's about 3 pages at the end of the forecast, pages 19 through 21, that show each of those lines in a little bit more detail of what makes those things up. So if you have specific questions, we can drill down into those. Yeah.
The PowerPoint isn't available on the agenda, is that correct?
It was sent probably later, so yeah, we just have hard copies, but we can attach it after
Okay.
the fact. Yep.
Okay, thanks.
So property taxes are the single largest source of revenue that we currently have in the general fund. So those figures are calculated based on Dave's taxable value numbers and extrapolated out for the future years. As a note, all of these years include that 5%, 5 mil reduction in property taxes for all outer years since the income taxes will be in place during all of those periods. So then included in the transfers from income tax We've not included this in prior forecasts because we had this discussion about the $1 million supplemental pension payment coming from income tax through the general fund to pay for the fire supplemental pension payment to kind of leverage those PA 289 dollars. So that is included in this forecast. And then assumed that same $1 million in all future years. So there's a transfer in for that $1 million on top of the 20% for public safety and on top of the reimbursement for lost property taxes. So speaking of PA 289, there's kind of a significant fluctuation there, and that's because there's a lag in terms of our expenditures and our revenue. So we had high expenditures in fiscal year 24 because we had the Protecting Michigan Pension Grant. So there was a large supplemental pension payment related to that grant in the 24 expenditures, which is why we're seeing an increase in our 25 revenue. And then because 25 expenditures are kind of back to normal, we'll see sort of a normal revenue for PA 289 in 26 and forward, including that $1 million. That's part of that conversation and that calculation. So that's still part of that. There's also, we have taken, because the formula, we're saying it's fully funded in the whole forecast, but that's an uncertainty is if the state's going to fully fund it. And then the formula is based on the percent of MSU as part of our taxable base, and that percentage, that value percentage has gone down about 1% each year. So just know there's that tiny fluctuation in revenue. Other intergovernmental revenue. So the increase that you're seeing in 25 relates specifically to the DDA. So they have added some contributions into the general fund for street lighting and for overtime the police serve for Albert Alfresco. So that started in 25 and that will continue out into the future years. There's a little variance as we're kind of working out that first year calculation or the cost recovery. So that's where there's that budget to estimate difference in.
Because that's not what's up there. Or what are you looking at right now when you're talking about?
The full. So this is just, the presentation is just a snippet of,
Okay.
but it is, I'm specifically looking at that large page in the forecast, but that should, I mean, it's very small, and that's why I'm using the big one. But that should be most of the numbers that I'm talking about for revenue. It's just much smaller. For franchise fee, in 24, we've included the BWL, well, we received BWL funds, but in 25 and all outer years, we've excluded BWL revenue on that line item. And that's all I'll say about that for right now.
Hey, before you go forward, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
You've got, essentially $210,920 on that line in future years. What is the source of that revenue?
Yep, that is our cable franchise fee
Got it.
from DirecTV Comcast.
Okay, thanks.
Can I ask another question while we're on this page? So
Yep.
the 2024 actual transfers from income tax fund was about $9.5 million, right?
Yes.
But earlier in the document, on page 5 of the attachment to the agenda, it says that 2024 income tax income was about $14.4 million.
Yeah, withholdings from income tax.
I'm sorry?
Withholdings from income tax?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you get from 14.4 million to 9.5 million? Is that all refunds?
So what's in the general fund, so income tax is its own separate fund. So
Yep.
all revenue collections, including withholding and estimates, is all in the income tax fund.
Yep.
But what comes to the general fund is a function of that. So the 20% of, for public safety comes into the general fund. So
So what happens to the remainder of the 14.4 million that's in the income tax fund?
So first off the top is pays for administrative.
Yep.
Then 60% goes directly to pension, and then 20%
Got
comes
it.
to general fund for this, and then 20% goes for infrastructure improvements to different funds depending on the year.
So I'm having trouble.
Oh, sorry,
getting this-
I'm sorry, I forgot that the lost property tax comes out first as well.
Okay, so I've had this question now numerous times. I'm still trying to understand what the net benefits of the income tax are. And I'm sorry if my questions are frustrating. I'm trying to understand the 9.5 million with respect to the 14.5 million.
So we can talk about, I was going to say the withholding is only one part of revenue. So there's also estimated payments, and then there's payments with returns, and then there's refunds that reduce those revenue numbers. So if we want to talk about.
So Andrea Smith, City Treasurer. The 14 million consists of all the revenue that we take in completely for the income tax.
Yep.
Now, all of that includes withholding plus filers' returns. If we withhold from them, but they do not file, we still are getting that revenue, but we don't know whether we owe them a refund or if they are supposed to pay us. So there is a large significant difference between those who file and those who have been withheld from. So that is that difference of about 6 million or 5 million, depending on the year. So.
And that money just sits in that fund?
We have to wait until they file. So we have been going out for state tape, trying to get people to file so that our compliance is up, because we don't know if we owe them a refund or if they technically owe us, but we hold that money in the meantime.
Okay.
Does that make sense for the difference, though?
So I get this idea that there's an income tax fund that's sort of it's a separate fund, and some of the money we can take out of that and put into the general fund, but the rest of it has to sit for the kinds of reasons that you just described.
Well, some of it, off the top, the 5 mils comes back into the general fund immediately. So the 5 mil property tax reduction, we pay ourselves back for. That
Yep.
goes into the general fund. And then there's the 60-20-20 that is split, so 20% more comes back to the general fund as well.
Yep.
Okay, so in the 9.5 million that I'm seeing in the big chart, does that include the reimbursement to the general fund for property taxes?
Yep. On
That's
page
part of it.
19, it kind of breaks it down into the 3 buckets that
Okay.
come back to the general fund.
Okay, so there's reimbursed for lower property tax rate, so that's 6.6 million, right?
Correct.
The million for fire.
Mm-hmm.
And then public safety allocation, is that,
That's the 20% that we've been.
that's the 20%? So where is the 60% that goes to pension liabilities?
That's paid out of the income tax fund directly, except for now we're doing this $1 million transfer. So $4 million is paid directly out of the income tax fund, sort of like as an administrative cost.
Okay, so that's the information I was looking for. So that's going to account for part of the difference between the 9.5 million and the 14 million that's in the income tax fund.
Sure.
Is that 4 million that goes directly to pension liabilities?
Yep.
And then what about the 20% that goes to infrastructure?
So that is transferred to local streets, it's transferred to the Parks Capital Improvement Fund, so there's a transfer out to those funds, and then the expenses to construct those projects happen in those funds.
Okay, so those are separate funds,
Correct.
which are not in this general fund overview.
Correct.
Okay. I'm still struggling for a way to try to summarize how much the income tax nets us. And I still don't see it in this document. Maybe this is the wrong document to look for it, because this is a forecast and it's focused on the general fund. But I hope that's something that's in the hopper as we get into
Absolutely.
budgeting. Okay,
I
thank you.
think one of the graphs in here could be sort of helpful. It's a little skewed because of intergovernmental revenue, but when we get to
The bar graph?
the next bar graph, that kind of helps tell the story a little bit.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
If I also may suggest that there was a presentation that Andrew Smith did to the charter review, that I'm going to invite her to a discussion only for the city council to receive that presentation, because that gets into how much money have we collected and how has it benefited pension, police and fire, streets or infrastructure, be it through local streets or Parks and Rec.
Yep. I look forward to that.
I just want to make sure, so bottom line, what you're really asking for is, first of all, you're asking for some sort of a summary of what actually has been netted from the income tax every year since it's been in effect. But then I think another component here, if I'm understanding your questions, which are good ones, is that you'd like some sort of a breakdown of that 16 million in terms of the different components of that categorized out of the 16 million. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think we're talking about 14 million. But
14, I'm sorry,
yes,
yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So something that, like a pie chart of that 14 million that shows all the components.
For some reason, I thought you had seen Andrew's presentation, so that
No.
makes a little more sense.
Okay, proceed,
Yeah,
please.
okay. Then I think the next item that I wanted to mention was charges for services are increasing in '25, mostly due to ambulance, and we still have some carryover of sidewalk projects where homeowners are contributing to those projects, the cost of those projects. And then other revenue has been a tough one for us to nail down, because that includes interest income, and that has varied so wildly in the last few years that we're trying to just stay conservative in our estimates, because we kind of get surprised each year with fair market value adjustments to the good and to the bad right after COVID. So we're trying to kind of maintain a norm for our forecast, as opposed to using most recent history as our starting point. What else did I wanted to? And then the last thing that looks has a lot of volatility is our grant revenue. In '24, that included about $6.5 million in the general fund related to the Protecting Michigan Pension Grant, and then another $6.5 million related to ARPA that went to support police and fire wages. So ARPA is 100% obligated at this point. It was required to be obligated as of this past December, so we've obligated all of those funds. We've not spent all of them. Most of the spending we're assuming is going to wrap up in '25. We have until December of '26. But we have it mostly, we're expecting to spend most of it this fiscal year. We have some of these other grants kind of in the pipeline with a Leo election grant and a Department of Justice safety grant. We have some expenditures and offsetting revenue included in the '25 estimates. We don't have our timing quite down yet, so we've excluded both of those items from the forecast. So hopefully it would be net neutral to the forecast, but we weren't sure when those would happen, so we just didn't want to kind of gum up the works. But on some of those grants, know that there's an initial cost that the grant is covering, but there could be ongoing costs if we have staffing or if we have a contractor or something that the grant requires us to maintain. Those costs are also not included in here. And the revenue is not included here. So going to that bar graph, since not everyone likes to look at numbers like I do, some people like pictures. This sort of gives a little bit of a history. It kind of shows you that history where we've added that income tax. So those red bars on the top, you can see that they start kind of halfway through this history when we implemented the income tax. Now, some of that is replacing our property tax, because you'll also see the blue at the bottom goes down in that same year that's implemented. But you can see, well, I think that you can see that red is growing larger than the loss in the blue. If you kind of compare 2019 to 2025, you can see that those blue are getting pretty close to equal. 24 has a big spike in it, and that is all that that grant revenue that I just talked about, the Protecting Michigan Pension and ARPA. So that's that orange section in the middle is very large, which that's going to come back down in future years. Well, and depending on what grants are available to us, we're certainly seeking what we can to find additional revenue sources. And then if you want to look at numbers again, if you go to the next page, it's that same graph, but it actually shows you the individual numbers for all of those years in those different categories if you want to drill into those details anymore. So I'm going to pause here. Anything else on revenue that is piquing your interest or queries for you that jumps out?
Well, I have a question overall, but
Sure.
are you through your presentation, or do you have more to do here?
Expenditures, but I can
No,
fly
go ahead,
through
because it's a question that's going to tie together the two, so go
Okay.
ahead, please.
All right, anything on revenue before I go on to expenditures?
I actually do have a question on
Sure.
revenue, and this is something I was talking with people at the beginning of the meeting about. So that on page 2 of the document that's attached to the agenda, there's a discussion of Headley and how it affects our property taxes. And we're currently at 17.5362. But we're currently at 12.5362. But when we adopted the income tax package, we adopted charter language that caps the millage rate at 13. My understanding is that Headley rolls back from whatever the cap is in our charter, which means that the reason we're at 12.5362 is because we have to be under Headley, as opposed to Headley applying to 18, and so we would have the room to go up to 13. So I think we're going to look into this to find out what exactly the truth is here, but my understanding is that we are at our cap right now with 12.5362. We can't raise property taxes above that without going to a vote of the people, is my understanding.
Is that the question for Audrey or for David Lee?
That's a question I'm casting into the universe.
Okay.
Or a
Mr.
comment.
Lee, do you want to respond to that, please?
So the way that I understand it is that the city, under its charter, has a millage that's specified, I believe, as 18 mills. That is reduced by Headley to 17 point, whatever that might be. I don't have that number committed to memory. 5362, thank you. And then from that, the 5 mills is deducted, the agreement with the income tax, to get us to 12.5362. Does that answer your question?
Not quite, because
Okay.
the idea of a 5 mil reduction, I don't think that's not what we adopted in 2018. We adopted a 13 mil cap. We didn't, there's no legislation, there's no ordinance or charter amendment that says we reduced taxes by 5 mils. What we did is we put a cap of 13 mils in the charter.
And I understand it differently than that. So maybe that takes some research and legal opinion, but my understanding is different than that.
Okay. I mean, I just looked at the charter, and there's
Okay.
nothing that says there's about a 5 mil reduction.
We get some answers on that.
Yep.
The council, please.
Okay.
Thank you. Ms. Kincaid?
So then if we move on to expenditures. So the presentation is again a snippet of the larger forecast document. So personnel services are broken out in more detail because they make up about 75% of total expenditures. So we talk about that in a little bit more detail, or show it in a little bit more detail. There's further details on page 22. So salaries and wages, we have assumed that we've added positions, we've filled positions, and we've applied COLA that we know, and any step increases that we are aware of that would come due in 2026. So 26 is built out with our kind of our best information for the budget as of right now. So these ones are not just extrapolated out from year-end estimates, but these are actual submitted position budgets for positions for fiscal year 26. If we could go to, well, I'll talk about positions in a second, but if we go to the next slide, you can kind of see a history of our COLA and wage increases. This is kind of a unique year because normally I can say all union groups, we've assumed the same COLA for all of them, but we have some contracts that are settled for through 2026 that have 4%. We have some contracts that are not settled for 25 or 26 yet, and we have some contracts that are settled, but they have a wage reopener for 26. So that kind of are dependent on the results of the wage study, but they might fall back on a 3% COLA if the results of the wage study aren't completed by a certain date. So we've included the COLAs for the groups that we know, and then we've used 3% sort of the groups that we are kind of unsure of, because that's what kind of falls back to if that wage study doesn't occur or results don't occur. And then just providing kind of the history of COLAs, and you can see that I've highlighted some yellow because those are the ones that are sort of in flux or not 100% certain to only be 3%. Then if we go to the next slide, we've got some additional positions included in the budget. So Public Works has a couple of positions, but there's an asterisk on Public Works because they charge a lot of their time to multiple different funds. So General Fund has a part of the share of a position, but they kind of support streets, solid waste, water, sewer, garage. So their time is kind of spread amongst many funds. Finance, we have an additional position for payroll and benefits. And then I've just noted the income tax compliance officer. The cost of that position is not in the general fund, but because that is an administrative cost of the income tax, that kind of reduces that kind of first thing that comes off the top from revenue collections from income tax. So that might have an impact on that 60-20-20 split. And then 54B added a position in fiscal year 25 that was not budgeted. So the person exists, so we budgeted it in 26. And then fire and police both have added an additional position. And then if you go to the next slide, we have a couple of positions that were removed from the budget. These positions have never been filled, so this is not eliminating a person, it is just eliminating a position that was never filled. All right. If we could go back to the expenditure slide. So that kind of talks about the salaries component of things. We talked a little bit about the retirement for the supplemental because in 24 we had that pension grant that had to be, expense had to be contributed to MERS from that grant revenue. So that's why there's that dramatic decrease in supplemental DB. The line above it is our ongoing retirement costs for active employees. Many are in the hybrid, so those are a function of wages. So as people retire out of the closed group plans, we are moving to hybrid plans, so that is more a function of payroll, that percentage of payroll. Okay, then I want to skip down to health insurance. So there's a fairly large variance here from 24 to 25. And there's a couple of things that are going on. So if we looked at 24's budget to 25's year-end estimate and budget, there's already a difference because we assumed when we were going to this new carrier, we had to build in an increase to the budget because we knew that the new carrier, because McLaren was getting out of the business, we built in an increase thinking that the carrier was going to have higher rates, which they did. So there was already that difference. Then that's compounded by 24 didn't have all filled positions, didn't have some of these positions that we've added. So the 26 and 25 assume filled positions, added positions with that rate increase. And then we've further increased the rate for 26 because we know that our carrier is going to have about an 8.7% increase because we're not experience rated yet, so they said that's a pretty common. I think that's our kind of preliminary guess about our increase going into next year. The other component of that is that we build our internal rates to make sure we're covering our costs of the insurance fund, which the rate that we came up with and developed in 25 felt like it was going to continue to cover those costs for 25, even with the new carrier, but there were sort of two revenue sources for that being the employer side and the employee side. Well, the employee co-share kind of went away and the employer absorbed that cost. So that's why we're seeing more costs in all the departments, because they're absorbing that co-share, which used to be about 10% of that rate. We are still under the hard cap, and we're still going to look to make sure that we stay under the hard cap, but with that increase, we don't quite know, is that the case for 26? So that would be, if we have to change the employee co-share, we'll know that when we finish our renewal, which is starting that process, but we don't have those results just yet.
What's the hard cap again? I missed this.
Yeah.
You probably explained it, but
Hard cap it's a Michigan law that requires the employer to only pay a certain amount. There's a limit. It's actually a dollar amount per type of plan. And currently we fall under that. So there's some alternative options of if we choose not to stay under the hard cap. But that would require council action, and it has sort of been our philosophy to stay under the hard cap at this point in time.
I don't want to get in the way of the parade, but when you get to your conclusion, would you let me know? Because I do have a sort of a summarizing question for you.
Sure,
So.
sure. Yeah, I think that's mostly of what I wanted to talk about for personnel services. Operating costs, we really just kind of build out from our 25 estimates, but the kind of unique thing this year is that we had a lot of one-time items in 25, specific contracts, one-off capital outlay items that we wanted to make sure we pulled out, so we weren't kind of building that into our future forecast. Now, not to say that they might not come up again, but they aren't the year-over-year cost, and they were some pretty significant dollar amount items, so we pulled those out so that you can see kind of how a normal year of operating costs would look. Capital is always an area of concern. We have very limited capital included in the outer years, but that's probably not realistic. But I think we're going to have to find some alternative funding sources if we want to pursue any sort of capital improvements throughout these future years. And so then everything else is more or less status quo. So kind of the summation of things is that you can see that 25's expenditures did grow. A lot of that is related to those one-time items that I was speaking of, and some of these known costs related to these grants that we received. And so that's why you kind of see the flip side of that in 26, where that expenditure growth is going down because we pulled those items out and then kind of maintained costs going forward. It's not the best picture I've ever seen in a forecast, but it might not be the worst. But what gives me a little heartache is seeing the use of fund balance in the $3 million every year. That's a pretty big gap that's growing each year. And if things stay as they are, our fund balance looks to be negative in 2030. So
could we put up that slide, because that's later in this.
Yeah, if we could go to the overall picture of the 5-year forecast.
Yeah, that's pretty disturbing.
Yeah. So you can see, the blue is the revenues and red is expenditures, and you can kind of see that gap growing. And that is a significant concern. So if we stayed the course, it's not looking great in 5 years. And that doesn't speak to any outstanding this is total available fund balance is kind of what we have. Total fund balance is what we have listed here. But we do know that we have some items that might use that available fund balance down. So.
Okay. You all set?
I'm done.
Thanks. Okay, I just want to try to get to the bottom line here. So first of all, just so I and the public can understand, we are currently in the midst of the fiscal year 2025
Correct.
budget?
We are currently in 25
Okay.
today.
And so looking at your revenue discussion sheet that I'm looking at, your expectation is that and I want to set aside in these questions the fund balances, okay?
Yep.
All right, so looking at your revenue discussion, our fiscal year 2025 expectation is for a total revenue of $48,798,501, correct?
Correct.
Okay, which represents a reduction of minus 19.6% from what?
Fiscal year 24.
Okay. And then if you flip, so the figure I have in mind is $48,798.501. I'm not talking about fund balance. And now I go to your fiscal year expectation for expenditures. And the figure I'm looking at is $52,025,840. Is that correct?
Correct.
Which represents an increase in expenditures for this year over the prior year of 4.5%, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So with my limited math skills, because I almost flunked accounting for lawyers, but I take 52,025,840, subtract 48,798,501, and I'm seeing a quote shortfall, end quote, of about $3 million. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I really want to look at our FY 3031. I know that's not part of this presentation, but as I understand what you're saying here is essentially that if we go along the way that we're going, and given, I think, what we can anticipate is almost $2 million less in revenue going forward because of the HEOS decision, we get to 2031, we've exhausted our rainy day fund, and we also have lost another $14 million from the income tax. So in 2031, are we facing bankruptcy?
I can't answer that question, but I can.
Okay, I think we are.
Okay.
So I think this, both the HEOS decision and what we're seeing tonight would indicate to me that sooner rather than later, we have to ask the public to support an extension of the income tax, if nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
Because we can't afford to get to 2031 and be suddenly confronted with what would then be actually more than $14 million in revenue when we have already exhausted the rainy day fund. That means we also have to do some interim activity regarding the revenue and expenditures that we have for the city in order to avoid that exhaustion of our reserves. So I think this points out a really significant issue for this council to address. And I'm just saying that we need to start to address this sooner rather than later.
Okay, do we have any other questions for Audrey?
I have a question.
Ms.
but
Watson, please, go
thanks.
ahead.
I think it might be for Mr. Bellman more, though.
Go ahead.
This could be a moot point going into budgeting, but do you foresee people requesting additional positions during budgeting time this year?
The requests that we have received were on that slide that Audrey showed earlier this evening.
This one?
The one prior to that.
Yeah. And so I'm talking about this time. So it's hard for me to understand going through budgeting, council agreeing to positions, and then finding out that the positions weren't filled that way. And so where I'm going at is I'm asking, is that going to happen again? Because if I'm saying yes to something, I think at minimum, council should know if it's not getting filled or why or how that happened, even though we said yes. And, sometimes there's changes to money and it comes onto the agenda and we're aware of it. But it's weird again for me that for budgeting, we participated in budgeting sessions, we agreed to these positions, and now we see that they were never filled, and there's really not an explanation for how we got from being presented the information, voting yes, to never filled.
So are you looking for an explanation of why they weren't filled, or?
I think-
I understand that
Yeah.
staff puts together positions they believe they need, and you approve and appropriate dollars for it. Things change throughout the year, either the ability to post and hire that position, or the challenge of where to place them in the building because we are out of space. And so those delay some of the positions that you have approved previously. I'll give you an example. The election coordinator position was talked about back in February, but because of the amount of work that was on the city clerk's office, as well as whether or not we needed someone dedicated solely to elections versus another support area, that's the reason why that position did not go forward. And then after having completed 5 elections without it, I was recommending it be removed.
When you say you were recommending it be removed, what does that mean?
So that means in the FY26 budget, that position will not be listed or funded.
Okay. Hopefully, council can be kept more in the loop of the timelines when we say yes to positions and then they're just not happening, because it makes me hesitant going into budgeting session to be excited about what's presented around new positions or different positions and then lose track and not understand that it actually didn't happen that way or the dollars didn't go that way.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Dr. Altman?
Yeah, so Mark raised the issue of sort of longer term, what happens in 2031. But could you put the bar chart back up? Yeah, thank you. So the questions that the mayor was asking about are actually the second bar from the left, a $3 million shortfall. And that continues through fiscal year 2030. That's obviously not sustainable. Are we thinking about shorter term cuts to try to stave off the worst implications now in response to the HEOS decision?
Yes. And that'll be presented to you as part of the budget process.
Okay.
Ultimately, you will have the say in whether those cuts are implemented or deferred or other revenue opportunities are pursued.
I keep coming back to this idea that it's hard to understand that there's no magic pot of money that governments run off, that you take in revenue and you spend it, and there's no other source of money than the revenue you take in. And so when we lose a chunk of revenue, I think it's important to make clear what we're going to lose associated with that, right? Because services and infrastructure cost money. And if we don't have the money, then we can't get the services and infrastructure. So I think that part of what we're doing here is we're discussing in public what people want out of their government and what they're willing to pay for. And to the extent we can make clear what we lose when we lose a chunk of revenue, I think that would be helpful, not just for the council, but for the community.
Thank you.
Can I ask one more? This is just the general fund
fund that we're discussing this evening, right? Because I think they're along the lines of my own concerns that I've already expressed. You know, I have concerns with regard to the state shared revenue, PA 289, and other intergovernmental revenue, given the legislation that is pending at the state legislature at this time. Because we will not be able to, and I personally don't think we should, let the state legislature know that, you know, somehow we're changing our policies with regard to those individuals who may reside in our community who are undocumented individuals. So under that legislation, we would be prohibited from receiving any of these funds. I think we need to take a look at that. There's similar legislation at the federal level. The president has basically decreed that a city like the city of East Lansing can only hope to have any federal grants that we have readily received in the past. So I think we need to take a look at this in terms of, and I'm sure the city manager is already examining this in order to present the budget for this year, which would be reasonable. I just want to bring, say one thing, both at the state level, I think at the national level and at this level, a budget is not a mandate to spend. It is simply an authorization to spend. And so if the city manager determines that that there are cuts that need to be made, certainly in the interest of transparency, I think the council should be clearly advised as to what those will be, but and the community, the rest of the community. But there are good reasons why we're taking a look at this time, and I really love what you have provided to us. It's very, very good. I think in the time I've been here, this is one of the best presentations I've had. So thank you and congratulations.
Okay, well, yes, ma'am.
Mr. Bowman, can you be more specific when we're saying cuts, what we're talking about?
I don't have the specific expenses that we would be reducing in order to absorb the shortfall of the $1.5 million from the Board of Water and Light franchise fee.
Do current staff need to be worried?
Position-wise,
Yep.
no.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we ready to move ahead? Okay, consent agenda. Thank you, Audrey. Thanks for coming. Thank you, Mr. Lee. City Manager?
On tonight's consent agenda, 4.1, approve the following appointments or reappointments to boards or commissions. A is appoint Jessica Sender to the Zoning Board of Appeals for a partial term ending December 31, 2025. And B is to appoint John McNamara to the Independent Police Oversight Commission to a partial term ending December 31st, 2027. 4.2 is approve a resolution honoring the holy month of Ramadan in the city of East Lansing. 4.3 is approve a substantial amendment in the amount of $3,695 to the East Lansing fiscal year 2025 Community Development Block Grant budget. 4.4 is approve a street closure request for southbound West Road from MSU FCU northernmost parking lot entrance that connects to West Road down to Greenstone from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. on Sunday, April 13th, 2025 for the Ronald McDonald House of Mid-Michigan's Run for the House 5K and 10K. And 4.5 is approve a conditional Class 3 rental license for an occupancy of up to 2 unrelated persons or a family for each unit at 842 Beach Lawn. The owner applicant is Mohammed T. Jat, Okemos, Michigan, and the local legal agent is Mohammed H. Abdul Jabbar, Lansing.
Can we have a motion?
Move approval of the consent agenda.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Moved by Altman, seconded by Meadows. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Do we have a motion with regarding to a closed session?
I will volunteer such a motion. I move that we enter closed session pursuant to MCL 15.268 sub 1 sub C to discuss strategy connected with the negotiation of a collective bargaining agreement and pursuant to MCL 15.268 sub 1 sub E to consult with the city attorney regarding trial or settlement strategy in connection with pending litigation in the matter of City of East Lansing versus Alternative Service Concepts, LLC, DBA, Davies Claim Solutions, and certain underwriters at Lloyd's London subscribing to policy number PK 1001512, the United States District Court for the Western District of Michigan, case number 1:24-CV-00635, for the reason that an open meeting could have a detrimental financial effect on the litigating or settlement position of the city.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Meadows. Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Altman,
Yes.
Councilmember Meadows,
Yes.
Councilmember Watson,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Singh.
Yes, motion passes unanimously. We will now adjourn to closed session.
Actually, they said sing. They said sing.
Yeah,
So you
Mayor Pro
voted
Tem
for
Singh and
Singh.
then Mayor Brookover.
Oh, I was here, I'm Singh?
Yeah, I guess so, yeah. That'll work.
It's
Thank
gender
you.
neutral. I'm okay with that. So, yeah, I voted yes. The mayor votes yes also. You all set? Okay, we're back in open session. We need a motion to return to open session. Could I have a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Watson, seconded by Brookover. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Ms. Watson, do you have another motion for us?
Yes, I do. I'd like to make a motion to accept the proposed settlement offer of $185,000 in the matter of City of East Lansing versus Alternative Services Concepts, LLC, DBA, Davies Claim Solutions, and certain underwriters at Lloyd's London subscribing to policy number PK 1001512 and authorize the city manager to execute all documentation necessary to effectuate that settlement.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Meadows. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Do we have another motion?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Altman moves to adjourn, second by Watson. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, everybody.